So we've had some wonderful insights from our panel today. We thought we'd bring them all together to talk about uncertainty in the current environment. And I would argue, and I'm sure Andrew Dittburner would agree, that every single generation that comes through this planet of ours, Andrew, thinks that they live in the hardest and most uncertain and most difficult environment ever. But I defy anyone to argue that there has been a decade ever in history where there's been this idea of certainty. How do you begin to forecast the future when it comes to investing?
So we don't forecast. I think, as spoken about earlier, no one would have guessed how markets have played out this year. And we might think, as you say, it's uncertain now. It was just as uncertain a year ago, 2 years ago. No one saw COVID, for instance. So we're not macroeconomists trying to position our portfolios for inflation or a weak dollar or whatever it might be. Trying to second guess those macro variables is a mug's game in our
So how
belief.
then do you do it though? Because Nassim Taleb told us 20 years ago that we are fooled by randomness. We think we can forecast the future. We think we can plan. We think we can structure. We think that we can determine the future. In fact, there are so many random events that happen each and every single day in our lives, most of which go unnoticed, but the big macro events that hit us hard and in unexpected ways. So how then do you build a portfolio that is randomness proof?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're going to talk about Nassim, he also spoke about anti-fragility, so trying to find businesses that can withstand difficult times. So that's exactly what we try and do. We try and, identify, good businesses, that can withstand, the good times and the bad times, and holding them for a very long period will generate, I think, fantastic investment results, over time. So it's not trying to, think about what part of the economic cycle, business cycle are we in, and, are cyclicals or defensives going to perform better? Rather, let's have a well-balanced portfolio of good businesses that will see their way through any cycle.
But Victor, I mean, but you have to capitalize on trends as well. Some of the best businesses of the future will be companies that best harness something like AI, for example. We don't know which ones those are going to be. So how then do you look at the healthcare sector, which is something that you're very passionate about at the moment, and incorporate a trend into it in a way that makes for an investment option for the future?
Yeah, look, I think when most people sort of think of AI, as we've seen in the last 6 months, and people sort of confine that thinking to your semiconductor businesses, I suppose your Magnificent Seven that we spoke about a little bit earlier on, and we do have exposure to that, as Andrew alluded to earlier on. But I think thinking longer term, I think the big issue as this technology evolves is how do the rest of the businesses outside of your tech companies benefit from this theme? And obviously, this is a question that we're asking of the businesses that we hold. I mean, I spoke about healthcare earlier on. So if I'm to give an example within that space, a business that we hold, Danaher, this is a business that operates in an industry, that is not really known for being at the cutting edge of technology, right? Mainly because of regulation. The regulatory bar there is a lot higher than it is for other sectors. But if you look at what that business is already doing as far as AI is concerned, they're making meaningful inroads. I mean, they're already starting to use AI to predict, which drugs, very early in the drug discovery stage, to predict, which drugs have a higher probability of succeeding. That results in significant time being saved for researchers, for scientists who are trying to discover, the next blockbuster drug. So those are the things that you tend not to read in the news headlines when one thinks about AI, but it comes down to productivity, right? As opposed to sort of just following a fad. How do businesses use that innovation to make sure that their employees are more productive?
Something that the Aspen Pharmacare founder and chief executive Stephen Sard once said to me, he said, if an investment banker brings him a deal, he knows it's too late. And he put his tentacles into the market in order to make acquisitions nice and early. Yeah. In the same way as once it's in the headlines, it's too late, right? Because then everybody knows it. And you've got to you have to have a competitive edge. And part of that, having a competitive edge, Tasneem, is to not be emotional. And we're drawn by emotion, and we normally regard investment emotion as a negative thing. We get frightened. We can also get overexcited. We get too excited about the AI option. We get too excited about various themes. How do we control those emotions in a way that makes us pragmatic, solid investors for the future?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts of investing is actually managing your own emotions, and it's even more difficult, as a manager to try and manage your clients' emotions. And one way, I guess, we would go about taking the emotion out of it is to look at what has happened historically. Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we do know how things have panned out, over, the past 5, 10, and so odd years. And we know that consistently, if you look at 5, 10, 15, going back however long you want, it's equities that has outperformed the other more traditional asset classes, local property, bonds, cash. And that's really what we rely on to tell clients and reiterate that staying in the market, staying invested is by far more important and the wiser decision than trying to time the market, than trying to avoid these crisis periods. Because as you said, there will always be a crisis, but you have to stay invested. And in that way, we kind of, take the emotion out of it and rather look at the fundamentals of the investment. If the fundamentals have changed, then yes, maybe you do sell. But if you still have a quality business, if your investment case is still intact, despite what the macro has done, you remain invested in that way. You kind of take the emotion out of it.
Andrew, I mean, to that point, I think it was Keynes who said in the long term we're all dead, which isn't particularly cheerful. But if you look at any investment graph going back to before the Great Depression, pick a point of 1910 to today, for example, the graph tends to start in the bottom left-hand corner and it tends to, with a couple of squiggles and wiggles, head toward the top right-hand corner. And that tells you all you need to know about investment markets over long periods of time. There are very few periods where there is an extended period of underperformance. The US had a terrible decade after the dot-com bubble burst. It was a tough time around then. There was a really rough time after 1929. It took nearly 30 years to get back to the 1929 levels of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, for example. But by and large, if you look at most periods of time, periods of 10, 15 years and more, equities, well chosen, well selected, not aiming for averages, outperform and do it consistently.
Yeah. So I think, if you look at bull markets versus bear markets, going back and you talk even going into that 1920s, the Great Depression period, I think if you go over the last 90 odd, I know we say 95% of statistics are made up on the spot, so I'm going to come up with it.
Well.
But there's about 72 years of the last 90 odd years were bull markets as opposed to bear markets. So I suppose the key message we'll leave you with is, don't let a bear scare you out of the market, but investing in good businesses, you've got to withstand the winter as we're doing right now to get to the summer. If you invest in good businesses, we'll get there.
Thank you to Tasneem, to Andrew, and of course to Victor. This has been Insights Exchanged by private clients, by Old Mutual Wealth. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've got deep insight into investing right now and given you some deep insight into the future as well. Bye-bye.